The previous basket is under review.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Basket Under Review podcast. I am your host, Eamonn Brennan, back again. I'm of Buzzer at EamonnBrennan.com. That's my newsletter. Go check it out. I'm also of Basket Under Review, the home of this podcast and the home of the best college basketball content, the most in-depth content you'll find anywhere on the planet. Our guest today is Rocco Miller, also of Basket Under Review, of Bracketeer.org. He's a college basketball analyst and writer, does a ton of bracketology stuff. And he also covers the mid-majors really closely. So we're here to continue in our preview series we've been doing the last 5-6 weeks here, where we've talked about every power conference, frankly, increasing levels of detail and depth, to the point that the shows are starting to get longer and longer, which is not a bad thing. I like long podcasts as well, as a listener. So it's been great. And we're going to cover sort of the rest of the landscape, talk about all the mid-major, quasi mid-major and mid-major conferences, teams that we think are going to be interesting this year. So it's going to be a really great discussion. Before we get to Rocco, though, I want to encourage everyone to go check out Basket Under Review. $10 a month, you sign up, you get access to everything we're doing at the site. You support this show and all the other shows that we put out for free on podcast platforms and YouTube. You get access to the Trilly Donovan Discord, where he breaks a ton of news, and the communities are extremely lively. So it's a really good deal. It's the best college basketball community on the internet, and now you've got some incredible content on a daily basis to sort of revolve around and inform the discussion of the greatest sport in the world. Also want to mention our sponsor, Homefield, homefieldapparel.com, the best retailer for actually really cool looking and well-made college athletics apparel. Check it out. Tell them Basket Under Review sent you, and thank you as ever to Homefield for sponsoring our show. All right, Rocco, you're here. We made it. How you doing, man? Welcome in.
Great to be here with you, Eamon. It's been an awesome ride so far with Basket Under Review. Listen to, I think, almost all your episodes. If not, I've got them earmarked for whenever my next trip is. So you're doing a tremendous job. It's phenomenal to work beside you as well. Like, I've followed your work as long as I can remember. Awesome to be able to officially cross paths and talk about a ton of different conferences today, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. We're going to, and thank you. That's very kind of you, by the way. And I appreciate it, and I admire your work as well. And like I said, really, it's been great to get in with the Basket Under Review guys in the Discord, and kind of do a little editor at large stuff here and there, and content ideas and all that good stuff. It's just been a really fun collaboration so far, and hopefully people are liking the podcast. I think they are, and we will hopefully deliver another great episode. If it's a bad episode, it's my fault. Rocco innocent. But yeah, we're gonna talk about the whole landscape of college basketball. Like I said, we have done every power conference so far. Some very intentionally, this is the Big Ten preview with Joe Jackson type of thing, where we just absolutely drill down on every team. We covered the Big East with John Fanta, but we also covered John Fanta's life and times and his journey and his all the Fanta lore. So it's been a variety of different conversations, but that's the whole point of the show, I think, and it's been good so far. But we have some big topics to get into too. First of all, we just had the new KenPom rankings come out, which is like a little mini holiday. It tells you the season is truly just around the corner. And for all the great work being done by all kinds of analytics purveyors these days, your Bart's Torvik and your Evans Miyakawa and more, Ken's are obviously, I think still the predictive metric gold standard, right? And so when he says a team is going to be good in the preseason, doesn't guarantee it, but it is a pretty strong indicator that your roster and your coaching staff and the history of your program, particularly recently, is all lining up for you to have a pretty good year. So, I have a few thoughts, but I'm wondering if there was anything just really broadly, since this is the first time I've done a show since the rankings came out, anything stuck out to you when you look down KenPom's list about the landscape of college hoops, not necessarily just mid-majors, but just any teams or leagues or anything sticking out to you that was sort of
Well, yeah, I think the first couple of things I noticed, looking at it right. Well, I think the first thing I noticed, Eamon, was just that 96 teams, the first 96 teams on the list, contain all 79 power conference teams. And I noticed that Ken is always doing deeper analysis, trying to revise these rankings to make them better for the preseason purpose, for the sake of the exercise, for the sake of the expectation, knowing that, it takes until about the end of January for the preseason component to be completely phased out. And, I think what it tells me just broadly landscape wise is quite simply follow the money, right? So if you're following the transfer portal, if you're following how last year was drastically different than the year before when it comes to the ability for a mid-major team or multiple mid-major teams to advance to the second weekend. We saw a kind of a drastic difference in last year's tournament. And of course, some of that is a little bit of luck. We saw UC San Diego play the daylights out of Michigan and barely fall short. Ball bounces a different way. They could have easily won and made it to the Sweet 16 eventually. Didn't work out. UNC Wilmington took a really good Texas Tech team to the brink. We saw Robert Morris play Alabama tough, but most of those games were over early. And a big reason for it is if you follow, and I know you do, the way rosters are built, you're probably, and I know I'll just use an Indiana example, but if you're the 10th best player or 10th highest paid player at Indiana, you're probably still making more than a lot of these mid-majors highest paid player. And so a lot of the, depth of these rosters at the Power 5 level, if not the entire Power 5 level, is overwhelming compared to even the starting five of a very good mid-major program right now. So I think that's starting to be reflected, or very much reflected, in KenPom's rankings. Maybe a little bit over dramatic. Like I do think Torvik with, he's got a bigger mix of mid-major teams in his top 96 than Ken does. Will probably be more accurate at the end of the year. But I do think, our colleague Kevin Sweeney, for example, he made a good example on the Discord, just saying like, hey, if you think Boston College is the worst Power 5 team, I still might rank them 5th or 6th in the Atlantic 10, which might still be around the same ranking. And what ends up happening if you're a Boston College or an LSU or a team stuck at maybe a Penn State stuck at the bottom of these power leagues, is eventually you just get beaten down to the point where you've lost 13, 14, 15 games and your motivation and your drive changes. Whereas if you were in the A10, you would probably have 20 wins and have a lot to play for. So, if given the purpose of KenPom, right, Eamonn, it's to deliver a power ranking for the total strength and threat that team poses. I think it's a fair ranking, and it's really it basically symbolizes where we are in college basketball.
Yeah, and that's a big topic, and that's one I wanted to get into with, and we're here already, so let's just do it. I mean, what are you hearing from, you've been going out, and people would have heard on this podcast feed, if you're subscribed in your app, and you should be, by the way, and if you're not, I'm very disappointed in you. But people would have heard on coming out on this feed, interviews that you've been doing at mid-major media days, talking to league commissioners, and you've been talking to coaches and players, obviously, at those media days too. What is the vibe with a lot of these mid-major, leagues like the Mountain West A10 is a little different. It's right. Parts of the West Coast Conference. You're not talking about these true mid-major leagues that I kind of think of maybe more towards down the line of like the Missouri Valley type of level, but and below, right? But what are their thoughts on the way this new era of roster construction and the money swirling around the sport has impacted them? Because I have always thought, yes, it's not good for mid-majors, right? Like there's just no way to sell it as NIL with all these schools with exponential amounts of money at the top of the game. It just isn't good for mid-majors. The flip side of that is it's always been difficult to compete on a resource level. Obviously, it changes a little bit when you're not. The incentives to leave your mid-major program after a year or two if you play well are now significantly different than they used to be. There was still a lot of up transferring 10, 15 years ago, but maybe not like we're seeing today. And I think the thing that I kind of hoped would happen is that talent would go the other way too, because maybe you're not going to make as much money as you are because you think you're going to be the sixth guy on a high major team. But if you're the star at one of these programs, you can, the smart mid-major coaches can get a guy like that. Maybe he's there for a year or two, maybe it clicks, and then they can transfer back up and go get their payday. And so the talent kind of moving not just in one direction. I'm not sure we've seen that to the level that I kind of hoped would be the case. Maybe that'll change as the revenue structure changes in the next few years here. But yeah, to the original question, what what are you hearing from these conferences and leagues about kind of how they are trying to mitigate some of these impacts? Because it's not an easy question to answer.
Yeah, it's a loaded question because there's a lot of different levels. I'll just start at the
Yeah.
commissioner level, and shout out to both the NEC commissioner and the SoCon commissioner for coming on to our Basket Under Review show live and doing this with me. But I've also had conversations with others. Obviously NEC represents the very low major of D1. They've been to 12 straight first fours for their AQ, their league champion. And then SoCon has just been always a league I've respected. One of the great stories of 2020 that we always forget is East Tennessee State would have been inside the bubble. We always talk about Dayton and San Diego State from that year, but East Tennessee State would have been an 11 or 10 seed with an opportunity to be good enough to be a second weekend team. And so it kind of hurts my heart a little bit that a league like that, which we always had a hashtag, right? 2-bid SoCon. But you could say that for leagues of the level of the Missouri Valley, Conference USA, and others. It's an interesting time because they certainly don't have, they can't keep up with the Joneses of the higher levels or even like the A10 and the American level. And so, places like Furman and Samford, for example, they're private. They can raise their own money. They can stay somewhat competitive. You'll notice they're in my top 60 I released at the beginning of the week this week. And East Tennessee State, Chattanooga, they have great coaching and different reasons they're probably sustainably good. But the places like, Western Carolina, Mercer, et cetera, certainly like starting from the ground up, trying to raise any dollar they can. Also, you have factors at places like Western Carolina where they were recovering from Hurricane Helene last year, just trying to even keep athletics alive itself. It's a challenging situation, to say the least. So in talking to their commissioner, it's more like they are one of the 10 leagues. Don't quiz me on all 10 of them. But I know it's as high as the WCC and it goes all the way through some of the lower majors. I think the Sun Belt, the SoCon are included, but 10 leagues recently, I think in the last 2 weeks, created a pact to support, I believe it's called the Scores Act, the one that the SEC and Sankey are pushing for, to basically start to control and cap basic rev share, thresholds and capacities at different levels. And I think it's just their way of trying to hang on and limit, how much can go out, on a sport by sport level. Whether it can work or not, every lawsuit about this has failed in the last 5 years. But of course, with, current government and different things that are at play now, who knows what the future holds. So I feel like these leagues are hoping that there is some sort of cap on that to where they can dependably have a certain amount of budget set aside. They're never going to pay for a school like even Furman to get $1 million in a year would be a huge milestone to pay their players with. But of course, as soon as one of these guys goes all conference, they're gone. So last year, the SoCon had, out of the 3 all conference teams, I think 11 of those 15 players still had eligibility. They're all, every single one of them is gone except for Ricky Bradley from VMI, and he stayed for other reasons because he's part of a military academy. And so and so the really interesting thing to me was just getting into they're holding on for every ounce they can save. Like I think in general they think like we do, where we want it to go back to what it was, where you could get 2 bids from a Valley or a SoCon or a Sun Belt or whatever. Any of those leagues, is just as long as you have like a team that can crack the top 40 plus a bid stealer, there's your 2 bids. But now that like the aspiration is just to hold March Madness together, just to even have a place, because effectively we have 7 different levels in college basketball. That's the way I break it down, especially if you consider the Power 2, starting with football being the Big Ten and the SEC. So even the Power 5 itself, you could argue, has 2 different tiers. And then you spill into that next group, which we would call the WCC, the A10, the American, and the Mountain West. And then, of course, you go into the fourth, that would be tier 3. The 4th tier, of course, would be the group of 5 conferences for football based on their budget. But again, some of those leagues are getting hurt in basketball. I would argue the MAC, the Mid-American Conference, has basically you could look at KenPom. It was their worst year in 20 years last year in basketball. despite Akron having a great record and Miami, Ohio, a couple other pretty good teams. But the bottom of that league was really, really bad. So rev share is affecting that. The amount of money that goes to football is affecting that. And then just overall, any dollar you can find affects everybody from tier 4 and below, and tier 7, of course, being like the NEC and the OVC. So right now, I think just to sum it all up, the commissioners are actually just trying to protect March Madness, because there is a real possibility within 5 years or less that the autonomous 5, or maybe even just the top 9 leagues or whatever, go off and do their own tournament with no inclusion of these leagues anymore. And that would just be obviously devastating. And I think there's enough people that still want to save it that we can't really see that yet. But that is the way it continues to trend. And that's where the commissioners are at right now. So it's a very interesting time.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time. And I think, very high level speaking, I think I see and I hear just, anecdotally from friends and people, a certain level of disillusionment with college athletics, in that it's still fun. You still want to watch it. Again, I went to Indiana, the Indiana-Oregon game this past weekend. Everybody's massively fired up, right? Mm-hmm. But I think there is a sort of low level unease that, not to pat myself on the back in any way, I think everybody would have called it at the time. But when you're moving these schools from the Pac-12 into the Big Ten, and you're creating this, bi-coastal super league. Mm-hmm. As weird as it sounds up front, it takes a year or two for people to be like, this is weird though, right? Like, this doesn't feel quite right. And so, as entertaining as the sport has been, and I think as, again, I've said this many times, from a pure quality of the product on the court standpoint, at the high levels, the transfer portal and NIL have been good. Teams are older, they're more efficient, they're better. They're just better. I mean, you look at last season, and the 4 teams that went to the Final Four were among the 4 best teams of the last 10, 15 years, just on pure analytics terms, right? They were very, very good in a year that had a lot of good teams from 1 to 25. And so it is a little bit of a weird spot to be in, where you're kind of appreciating the strength of the product while also looking at the broader landscape. And one of the things that makes college basketball so unique and so great is your Furmans and your SoCon, milieu, and teams out of nowhere that get good for a year or two. And those are their, those are their years to maximize. Indiana State a couple years ago, and we're going to talk about Josh Scherz and Robbie Avila in a little bit here, but that was Indiana State's year, man. Mm-hmm. And they went to the NIT, and their coach goes and their best player goes, and everybody else gets picked off by the portal, and that's that. And I totally understand from a perspective of a Sycamores fan, just being like, that was a fun season, but this sucks. Like, it's just a bummer. So it's a weird time to be in, because there are good things about it. There are bad things about it. I think the thing that everybody can agree on is that the NCAA tournament, as currently constructed, at least in spirit, right, even if you change some of the details, needs to continue to exist. That is a core pillar of what makes college basketball good. And you actually reported last week some of the mooted discussions about the way an expansion scenario would work that the NCAA is talking about, which teams would be sort of in the expanded Tuesday and Wednesday games. This caused quite the kerfuffle online, as basically any expansion discussion does these days, I think, because the vast majority of people, of college basketball fans, casual, avid, almost all of them, and they're not everybody, and there are people who make good points for it, and I'm kind of, I'm softly anti-expansion, but I hear arguments from people that I respect, like Ken Pomeroy, for example, and I think, okay, like, that's totally reasonable and well thought out. But let's walk through what you reported about the structure of the expanded tournament, how it impacts mid-majors, and how it would change a little bit about what I think even most people have come to accept about the first 4. The first 4, I think there's occasionally people are like, oh, you should just put it should be all 12 seeds playing in those games, or all of the bubble teams should play in those games, right? And let the 16 seeds get their shot against the number 1. A lot of those 16 seeds are happy to be in the first 4 because they're playing another 16 seed. They've got a chance to win an NCAA tournament game, and it counts as an NCAA tournament win.
Yep.
The win share is an NCAA tournament win, whether you're playing Cooper Flag or you're playing another 16 seed ranked 200th in KenPom, right? So they're kind of happy
Right.
with the situation the way it is. And so the first four has always been kind of like, yeah, in an ideal world, blah, 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 but people are basically okay with it. Even if I think most people would just be happy with 64 teams anyway. You do kind of like those nights, the first four, the first game each on Tuesday and Wednesday night. Those teams get their moment in the sun. It's nice, right?
Right.
This new setup is a little different and a little bit more, I don't know if this is the right word, but kind of insidious. Why don't you walk us through it?
Yeah, sure is. I think we have gotten comfortable with that, and there is some charm to the current landscape. But with the 76 team proposal that was laid out, had to do some digging, and I think when I reported on it, I didn't know because I was traveling so much. I think I bounced from multiple media days last week, and I think I went to 5 practices all over. So for me, I didn't know what was out there and what wasn't, but I decided to just do my due diligence, figure out how this is going to work, because that's one of the key questions I think that was still left. If you're going to go to 72, 76, 90, whatever, how is it going to work for the opening round? So to get to the bottom of that, I read through kind of some of the fine print. Seems like this is the model the NCAA is prepared to move forward to be voted on. So again, it's not official, but this is the one that they've got the most consensus on. So we probably need to treat it the most serious, which is it would be a split of the 12 lowest automatic qualifiers having to play in what's called the opening round. Today known as the first four, they'll change it to the opening round because there'll be much more than 4 teams, of course. And then the last 12 at-large teams would have to play in the opening round. So to break that down, and the 1 through 16 per region seed-wise format is not going anywhere. They want to keep that as uniform as possible. So with that being said, the simple math is every single 16 line would have an opening round winner. That accounts for 8 of those teams. And then 2 of the 15 seeds, you would assume that the 2 bottom 15, so probably have to play the 2 strongest 2 seeds, would also have to play opening round games. And so the one thing I screenshotted on X Twitter that I think got a lot of attention was who those exact 12 teams would be. You probably saw UNC Wilmington and Robert Morris among some other quality teams in that group. That it's hard to fathom.
I've got it. I'll just let me read it out for people because I
Sure.
got it pulled up. So 57 UNCW, 58 Montana, Robert Morris, Wofford, Omaha, Bryant, Norfolk State. I hope I live in Virginia now. I hope I pronounce that right, or my wife's going to give me a hard time. SIEU, American, Mount St. Mary's, Alabama State, St. Francis, and then you're adding in the last a number of at-large teams into that group too, right?
Right, exactly. So we'll cover the at-large in just a second. So on the AQ alone, you're talking about Wilmington and Robert Morris, 2 teams that showed extremely well that may have had to play each other just to get to the next round. So I think the initial visual probably created a lot of panic, which I didn't know how the response would be, by the way. I wasn't trying to prove any point. I just want one of the things I try to specialize in is talk about and provide more context to things that aren't being covered well enough. And so obviously that checked that box. So that's good.
I will say this, speaking of the response, you got ratioed in terms of there are more replies than likes, but not because people are mad at you, which is what's funny. They're mad at the idea, but it inspired a level of anger that is almost like indirectly being expressed through the classic Twitter ratio system. But it's all people just being like, this is BS. I hate this.
It is, yeah. And I think people are so, and myself included, so married to how March Madness works, what they can count on. Any kind of ruffle to that is going to be a major shakeup. And I remember when it went from 64 to 65, and they just added that one game. And you probably remember that. Like there was a lot of noise about that. Then 65 to 68, a lot of noise about that too. So of course this is going to have an even bigger splash. But that would be the reality. So on the flip side, obviously we kind of know all the negatives. If you want to see the negatives, there's a ton of replies in that one post. But on the flip side, a bunch of these leagues, SoCon included, would be in a position where, Wofford was an upset winner. They were the 6th seed in the SoCon tournament. That's how they landed in that part of the seed list. where they would actually be able to have a better chance probably to earn a unit for their league financially. So that's how you get support of that level is, hey, either we're going to send our best team and they'll get like a 12, 13, or 14 seed, or we'll get an upset winner, but they have a really good chance, especially since they're hot, to go win that opening round game and get us more units that way. So I think it was a really easy model to sell the lower leagues on. So hopefully that's self-explanatory. And I think also the way fans, might adapt to it in a couple of years. The first year will be very weird, of course, but I think by year 2 and year 3, the comfort level will be, hey, we're actually getting a lot more close games now because you have if Wilmington played Robert Morris, those two teams were already playing extremely well last year. The winner of that would have came in even more confident against, an Alabama or a Texas Tech, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can look at it, but we might not have as many blowouts throughout the tournament, which is how the execs are going to sell this to us, just to warn you, if you do not like the pros. But you're not going to have as many blowouts with this model. And that takes us to the at-large spots. So in the last 12 at-large spots, you're basically affecting this year we'll have 37 at-large spots and 31 automatic qualifiers. When we go to the Pac-12, reintroduce the Pac-12 next year, that will be 32 auto qualifiers, but up to 44 at-large teams, basically adding 8 to the current number of 68 to 76. So when you look at 44 at-large teams, you basically have to assume, this is how I'm looking at it, and you're the bubble watch king, so you tell me if this maths for you. But we'll have 5 Power 5 champions that are obviously all going to be inside the cutoff. The Pac-12 will be an outstanding basketball league, in my opinion, with Gonzaga, San Diego State, Utah State. I mean, the champion is surely going to be inside the cut line. The debatable ones will be maybe the American, the new Mountain West will be watered down, but they still have New Mexico and UNLV and Grand Canyon. Atlantic 10 should send a team at least that could be inside the cut line. And the WCC, at least for the immediate time being, will still have St. Mary's. And, of course, San Francisco and Santa Clara in my backyard here, very invested as well. So we'll just assume, for the sake of argument, all 10 of those leagues, so that's Power 5, all 5 of those, Pac-12, Mountain West, A10 American, and WCC, 10 will be inside the cut line. And then you've got the other 34 spots, or 44 spots to get up to 54 teams. So I think that means your assumption is correct, Eamonn, where all the way the bracket math shakes out, not to get too boring with that, but you'll have pretty much all the 12 seed games be opening round games, probably a couple of the 11 seed rounds. And then if you do have surprise automatic qualifiers from one of these leagues, say it's a Santa Clara or something, they could land as 13 seeds. So you have a chance to see some dangerous 13 versus 4 games, or maybe even a 13 seed opening round game. But for the most part, it should be between the 11 and 12 lines.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot there. I think I feel like I'm back in bubble watch mode right now, where I got to get my notebook out and start jotting all this down before I start the column.
We have 2 years, so it's okay.
Yeah, but it's just, so you mentioned talking about the at-larges. So like last year, you've got West Virginia, which I think should have been in the tournament anyway. So that's good for them. Usually the first team out has a case anyway. There are some years where the first team out, you're like, you're good. Like, whatever. I think West Virginia last year genuinely got kind of screwed. Indiana, I don't think that about. Ohio State, I don't think that about. Boise State, I don't think that about. And then you're going another 4 down the list there and getting into teams where you're doing bracketology or doing bubble watch like I do. Those are the teams that by the end of the season, you're just kind of like, oh, God, like, you're not a tournament team. It's cool. Now, we'll have to readjust the window, right? We have to readjust the paradigm, understand it's different. And there are quality teams in college basketball who don't get in the tournament some years. And the NIT, there are teams that belong in the tournament that don't get in. Your Indiana States and other examples of mid-major teams who look great analytically, can't schedule the non-conference games they need to show well at that part of the season and get into conference play and win a ton of games, maybe lose once or twice. And that's kind of like every game is super high stakes for them. That's been the case for decades in terms of trying to get in the tournament as a mid-major at large. But where are you on? I think the big question people have about tournament expansion fundamentally is will it help more mid-major teams get in the tournament? Or will people just say that, and then, as we see from, as mentioned before, the preseason KenPom ratings being in the top 96 or whatever, dominated by the Power Five in a really remarkable way, because of the way the sport is trending outside of the NCAA's purview in many ways. A lot of well-intentioned people at the NCAA, I think the people that sit on the committees are fundamentally well-intentioned. They do want to evaluate rosters in isolation. I don't think there's an anti-mid-major bias inherently in the committee room, right? But because of the way the sport is trending structurally, you could make the argument that these expanded at-large spots are not going to go to mid-majors in a way that I think some proponents of expansion might say that they should or hope they would.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think the selection process is not changing, right? So it's a discussion in the room. One thing I've studied for a long time is who are the people in the room and what do they value and what do they care about? And then trying to simulate those discussions is probably impossible, but I try to do that anyway.
It is tough. That's what we do in Bubble Watch too. And you're sort of, even in the past few years, it's changed faster than it used to.
Sure.
Suddenly WAB, whichever, Ken corrected me on my pronunciation the very first podcast. I still don't know it's right. That has become a big deal in the last 2 years,
I think they just added it officially last year, but I think a few of the members were using it on their own accord the year before, if I understand correctly.
So these things change quickly, and trying to, take a historic view of what the committee values and doesn't value with different people in the room every year. It's like you can get close, but you may have some surprises along the way.
You bet. And yeah, one of the things last year that concerned me a lot for the mid-majors, I guess, is they had 7 new members for various reasons. There was only supposed to be 4 new members. Then 3 people either changed jobs. I know over here, Santa Clara's AD stepped down. And then, the WCC commissioner, Stu Jackson, got on, which overall that was a net positive. He's big time basketball guy, as you guys know, but, overall, just because there were equal mid-major representation, if you will, 6 of them and 6 from the power leagues, the votes don't usually tend to go that way. And somebody made a really good point to me at some point during the process last year that, you don't know who or what each situation is, but some of these commissioners or ADs that are representing mid-majors aspire to be at a Power 5 school, in the near future. And so they might not vote the way you think they vote. The other thing the main thing that did concern me though is I have the luxury and the opportunity. I've just worked really hard to build relationships with these people. I think overall they have a very difficult job. In most years, they get most of it right. I might only disagree with 1 or 2 teams a year on average. Sometimes I've actually said they got all 68 right. Probably not very often, but it's happened. And so they have a difficult job. We know they have way more responsibilities than just men's basketball. The committee requires you to do all sorts of things that I think the public doesn't realize. Like if a city wants to bid on a future host, even if it's for first round, the entire committee flies out to that city and gets wined and dined. It's not stressful or anything, but it's time consuming to just be a part of this thing. And so one of the things that came up with I think the WAB being the leader, or the WAB, wins above bubble, we'll just say that, as well as some of the other metrics that are added. So Torvik was added last year for the first time. And then we already had KenPom introduced a couple years ago. Right. As well as, strength of resume has actually always been a pretty solid one, in my opinion, for just getting the 68 right.
For as much as people have given BPI a hard time in recent years, and there's some weird stuff baked into BPI, like the altitude home court advantage thing is a little wacky, but the strength of record, I think, is pretty widely respected by almost everyone who does this stuff. With any intent. Strength of record has been, I think, was what's the right word for it? A bit of a mile marker in terms of, hey, this is a way to also evaluate a team, is how they performed against their schedule relative to how we think other teams would have. And that's essentially wins above bubble also in so many ways. Like these record metrics have become more and more prominent, and strength of record kind of kicked that off a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think it was some of that stuff is super helpful, and I agree with you. Strength of record was predominantly a good tiebreaker if you could not decide like the difference between two teams, or if it's just impossible to compare results. Like, I think that's the problem. Like Indiana State ran into a couple of years ago was they had 5 cracks against teams above the bubble. They went 0-5, but then in almost all their other games they were completely dominant. And what do you do with a team like that? You can't compare it to like a Mississippi State who gets 20 cracks at 20 at bats in their own league plus another 6 at bats in non-conference, and you just have a ton of data, and then you can see their road record with a pretty clear conviction if they belong or not. And that's what made it hard. But I still always believed, at least to the process of all the previous committees up until the last couple of years, walking us through their process of wins away from home, non-conference strength of schedule, who did you play, how did you do, where did you schedule games, what was your intent to schedule. And what I saw happen last year was a much more metrics-based voting. And for me, maybe I'm a little old school, that was extremely concerning. I made an example out of Texas. I have nothing against Texas. In fact, I used to go to Austin for work every month, and I love it down there. But last year's Texas, there was zero precedent, and North Carolina got all the attention, and we know why. But to me, Texas had no precedent getting in last year because they lost 7 games at home. I don't remember a team ever getting in with more than 5 losses. There's only been, I think, 3 teams with 15 losses to get in ever. And Texas, of course, became the 4th. But those 3 examples all had wins against either 1 or 2 seeds. Texas hadn't even beaten a team better than an 8 seed until championship week when they beat Texas A&M, who was a 4. And then, of course, the kicker was they were 286th in strength of schedule with miserable road marks. Basically, I had eliminated Texas off the board over a week before the SEC tournament because I know what all the precedents are. So what they did by including a team like that was breaking precedent to include a Power 5 team with a big brand. And you could argue the North Carolina thing if you want to. There's plenty of reasons to argue them not getting in. Obviously, another big brand. And it just told me, like on a much broader level, the metrics are going to always favor those types of teams because, you know, we could have a whole episode about the net, but the net is going to always advantage the better the league you're in. You probably the better athletes you have, which means you can blow teams out. You're going to be able to multiply those offensive efficiency markers, those per possession markers. And of course, when you base the wins above bubble on the net, that becomes basically a triple down on the same tool. So like, that's the thing that drove me nuts, because if you use like Bart Torvik's wins above bubble as a quick example, you know, teams like UC Irvine, Boise State, etc., were all higher than the one that the NCAA voted off of because they based it on the net. Right. So they're basically like almost every SEC team had a higher WAB than the Torvik WAB. So if they're just going to vote off metrics, it's only going to continue to compound the problem of including more power teams, which, to get to a very long answer here, I would imagine like a really bad Nebraska resume that got them into the Crown tournament and did not even qualify them for the Big Ten tournament would probably, as sad as it is to say, get in on a 76-team field over a UC Irvine who won 19 games away from home, won games in every time zone, won games in other countries, and beat a team inside the bubble in UC San Diego on the road. And to me, that's the heartbreaking stuff.
Yeah. And again, like these can be, not always, but these can be one-off seasons for these programs. And so it's doubly heartbreaking if you've got a good, you know, like a Davidson in peak Bob McKillop times, or a Belmont with Rick Byrd, where you're kind of those teams are at bat every year, and maybe they get in one year, maybe they don't, but next year you assume they're going to be right back in the mix or close enough where they'll either win their conference tournament or they'll get a look, right? Yeah, there's hope every year. There are lots of programs who pop up for a year or two, and then particularly these days, but always it's been the case. Your graduating class matures, you've got juniors and seniors, you've been working towards this sort of build for 3-4 years, you're finally here, that team doesn't get in the tournament, and then that's that. and the program goes
Right.
back to being whatever it usually is, and that stuff sucks.
It does. And I do think like the A10, maybe the WCC, but who knows what that looks like without Gonzaga. And of course, the new Pac 12. I think they will benefit. To answer your original question about who benefits from the 76 expansion, I do think you can see an extra team from those types of leagues get in because they're very invested in success. Like the amount of money at the top 7 A10 teams coming into this season being spent is much higher than teams like California and Stanford in my backyard, who are technically power conference teams. And if you're that invested, like I think the NCAA is just following the money. It's going to have a trickle down effect into the way these commissioners and ADs vote, and obviously in the way these teams can actually perform. So if it's true that like George Washington, for example, we'll talk about them, has a $5 to $6 million roster, like why can't they go out and be top 30 in Ken Palm and get those types of metrics that will get the votes?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, we are going to transition into previewing teams like Georgetown and beyond. But it's great to get your perspective on this because, I think a lot of people, it works on multiple levels. Like a lot of people are sort of just against tournament expansion regardless. And then,
Right.
they don't care. They don't want to hear the details. Just keep it the way it is, please. Thank you. Which is fair enough. I
Yeah.
can completely get around that way of thinking when it comes to something like the NCAA tournament in a world in which college sports have changed in the past 5-6 years more than they ever have, ever.
Right.
And it can be disillusioning. It can be confusing. It can make you a little bit colder towards the entire enterprise. And you don't even have to be an old school fan to feel that way. Again, I'm a big pro portal, let kids go where they want to go, let them maximize their careers, let them make money. Their coaches do it. They should be able to do it. Like I'm cool with it, basically on an ethical sort of
Sure.
level. But the impacts of it are present different challenges for different schools and different leagues. And the same is sort of true of the tournament. It's like, even if you're pro tournament expansion, I don't think there are too many people who are pro tournament expansion with the idea of loading up on 17 and 15 high major teams or 19 and 16 or whatever. You know what I mean? Like I don't think
that's the that's the major eyesore
outside of big conference league offices. That constituency does not exist. And so that's where people also, you bump up against this stuff. Is like, if this will help more non-power conference teams get in the tournament, okay, maybe you hold your nose and take your medicine or whatever. Mixing metaphors there. But
it's tough for the public because like last year, I could get behind Vanderbilt getting in, even though their strength of schedule was terrible. In historic terms, if they were anywhere near the bubble, they would have been left out. And same with like Oklahoma going 6-12 in league. I know they were undefeated in non-conference, and I know Porter Mosier's coaching his butt off and losing a lot of close games, and he's in the best league. But like leaving Oklahoma out, I don't think would have bothered anybody in the general public unless you're from Oklahoma. But they found a way, and again, this is where like it's a brand process, and follow the money. It'll tell you all the answers you need to get access to the tournament. I mean, having a brand is everything, and last year proved that.
Yeah, and look, I would just prefer if high major conference commissioners stopped talking about access altogether.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because access is not infinite; it's zero sum. And if you're talking about access for your league, just say that. Right. Don't talk about access for student athletes. Don't talk about access for the broad. Look how many teams there are and what percentage we put them in the championship, whatever. That's not what you're talking about. You're talking about getting a couple more of your teams who wouldn't have gotten in before into the tournament because you're looking out for your own conference's interest, because that's your job. You get paid a lot of money to do that. And that's
Absolutely.
fine. But don't sell me the hi hat like, well, it's really just about improving access for all of Division I. No, it's not. And do not tell me that. Okay. Speaking of all of Division I, we're going to get into our, think of it like a big map, like the Big Ten map, right? That they play during literally every game. and we're just going to bounce all over the country, kind of in disorganized fashion. But we're just going to talk about leagues, teams that we're particularly interested. We're going to start with like the Mountain West A10, WCC, the kind of stalwart just outside the power conference, type of league. So I sent you the rundown ahead of time. I let you get prepped. There are some of these teams and leagues that I am going to be super, not super, but relatively dialed in on. There are going to be some teams that I am not going to know as much about, and we're just going to prompt and talk about them. But let's start with the Mountain West as a sort of just a broad preview for them, because I think it's the league, certainly with the possible exception of the WCC, at least in the top, sort of half of the WCC recently, top 4 or 5. But there's more depth in the West Coast Conference these days. But the Mountain West has been for the last few years anyway. I mean, what was it? 2 years ago they got 6 teams in the tournament.
6, yeah.
So it's a quality league with a lot of depth. So it's almost barely a mid-major at this point. But where are we on the Mountain West this year? It's the last year, sort of
Final
the current
rodeo.
Mountain West, and so it's a bit of a send-off year for a league that I have always really enjoyed, and I think has a good sort of culture that I'm going to be a little sad to see split up and dispersed into various other leagues.
I'm with you on that. I've been piecing together a piece, I guess you could say, on the Mountain West. It should hit basket under review by the end of this week, but in case that's wrong, maybe next week. But it's all about that. It's about it being the final rodeo. And it was a heck of a ride, especially the year you mentioned 2 seasons ago, basically hitting an inside straight to get 6 teams in. I was able to confirm with multiple committee members after the tournament started that New Mexico would have been left at the altar if they did not win that conference tournament. And so it really was the inside straight for them to take a 6th bid for the league. And obviously what that means for the future of the league is pretty dang important, because you could argue some of their strongest, if not their strongest programs are all on the way out, especially as you look at this year's preview. I would say there's a first tier, whatever order you have is more than reasonable, but I think the consensus would have San Diego State leading the charge, especially if they're full strength. Ken Palm's got them 30th. Some people have them top 25. Utah State's certainly in that group. Mason Falslev's got a really good chance to be the player of the year. He's a high major player that loves Logan, Utah. It's kind of like the luckiest thing a Utah State Aggie fan could ever want.
I said this to Ryan Odom when he came on the show, just like, Utah State changes coaches all the time. Obviously, like, he's a good coach. They've hired good coaches, but like, what is it about Utah State? And he kind of answered like there's just a basketball culture at the school, but also in the state where like kids from Utah want to play at one of the big Utah schools, and Utah State drifts off that. It's like, they kind of recruit at a similar level as Utah, maybe not quite BYU these last couple of years, but historically kind of in that mix too,
Yep. And they all used to play each other. That's the sad part. Well, now Utah, BYU have to play each other, but Utah State got kind of X'd out of the main rivals. It'd be great to get that back one year. But you're exactly right. I've had the opportunity to go out there for a couple of games, and that place is unbelievable. The summit, the ceiling, that's the thing I noticed, is the ceiling just kind of from the top row. It's like, I don't know if the people at the top row can bump their head on the ceiling or not, but it's really that low. And so basically all the noise just gets trapped right back onto the court. The student section at Utah State is like no place I've ever seen. They get there before the media. So when I think I've been to 2 games there, and I feel like I get there like one of the first person in the arena, and there'll be full rows of students. And it's almost like going to church, because they sing songs the entire warm up, and they all know the words. And if you're not from there, you certainly don't know the words. So it's kind of wild to be an opponent in that place. And you can tell why they almost never lose there, because it's deafeningly loud. And, as soon as they go on a little run or different momentum things happen in basketball, that place is electric, and the game can get away from you in a hurry. Happens all the time. And they've done a great job, obviously, hiring coaches on top of that and retaining talent. But for like Mason Falslev, he's born and raised, to my knowledge, out of Logan, never wanted to leave, doesn't really have that much interest to leave. I'm actually a Washington guy originally. So when Washington hired Danny Sprinkle, we were all like, oh, sweet, we're going to get Mason Falslev. This is going to be great. Obviously Great Osipor was the big fish, but I kind of knew Falslev was the young, more talented, and you could keep him for multiple years kind of guy. And so when he didn't leave that year, it was kind of like, okay, if he's staying in college basketball, he's playing for the Aggies. So they're certainly in that top three just with him back. I'll get into them in a second overall. And then Boise State. I mean, Boise State's earned the right. They've had 4 straight years in the top 50 of KenPom. Now, of course, those were all 4 Tyson Dagenhart years, and his special career has now come to a close. So the test will be back on Leon Rice, who never finished in the top 60 the 6 years before Mr. Dagenhart. But I think they're certainly capable and solid enough, and they'll be very good defensively to surprise and maybe even win the league. So I think that's the first tier. And then after that, you got New Mexico. I thought just made a tremendous hire. Probably got the hottest coach in the carousel, you could argue, with Eric Olin. Basically, people nationally looked at UC San Diego most likely as a team that came out of nowhere, but he was building that thing up for a couple of years, and it really, really hit because, like you said, Eamonn, earlier, it was one of those programs where he basically did the rare thing nowadays and actually got guys to stay for junior and senior year last year, and it all just hit and clicked, and they went from a really, really solid team the year before that surprised, and I think they got top 3 in the Big West the year before, to, of course, being at-large level good last year, winning the double Big West championship. So what he's done at New Mexico is he brought some of those guys with him. They did a pretty good job in the portal, and he's got a tremendous coaching staff. I know each of those assistant coaches well, and I just think New Mexico is going to be one of those teams as the season goes on. It's going to take them a while to figure it out, but I think by the Mountain West tournament for sure, they'll be extremely dangerous. Grand Canyon joins the league, another team, them and New Mexico, with just unbelievable home court advantage. I went to my first Grand Canyon home game last year. I mean, it's deafening. Like that's its own thing as well. Kind of not quite Utah State, but different, with more songs and more traditions. And that's such a new school, but they have like this whole orchestrated thing they do from 2 hours before the game until the game starts. It's going to be really, really difficult for any of these Mountain West teams to go in there and win. Plus, they have high major level talent.
They have high major resources.
High major resources, yeah.
And this is not, the forum to settle this debate or whatever, but Grand Canyon's model of academics is not vastly, but pretty different from a lot of other schools, right? And they have a huge student base, much of which is online. And so the money that they make as a school, they're putting into their basketball team, and you're seeing the results. I mean, in a very short space of time, they've gone from nowhere to a really good coach in Bryce Drew, consistent, high major-ish level talent, right? And they are now in, they are going to be, as you alluded to earlier, one of the better teams in sort of the new Mountain West moving forward, just based on a resource situation. And I don't know if they're an expansion candidate down the line for even an even bigger league, maybe in part because of that model. There may be some Pac-12 and other bigger league front office types who are kind of like, that maybe not. If we're in a quainter time, realignment used to be tied to like academics. Even when the ACC picked up Stanford and Cal, it's weird. They're like 3,000 miles away, but they're great schools, and the ACC has always prided itself on that. You can sort of sell it that way. And maybe that's the Grand Canyon thing might be a little trickier in that regard. But on the basketball court, they have been consistently good now for 3, 4, or 5 years, and they're going to continue that from all accounts.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, 2 years ago they won a game in the tournament, and they took Alabama to the wire in the second round, and that's the Alabama. Yeah, and Alabama, of course, goes to the Final Four that same year. So they're like right there as a program, and Bryce Drew has really stabilized it. A big mistake, I thought, by Vanderbilt at the time to let him go, but GCU did a great job bringing him on, and now he probably doesn't want to go anywhere because that's a great place to work, and they constantly have resources for him to operate with. And in the New Mountain West, like you said, as long as they're in that league, they kind of remind me, I don't know if you follow college baseball at all, but they kind of remind me of Dallas Baptist of baseball, where they just keep moving up leagues. I think that team's up to like Conference USA in baseball now, and it doesn't matter what league they're in, they just win it every year. So yeah, it's a huge addition for the league because now, as much the politics is going to tell them to not let Grand Canyon in, and everybody pretended like they were pissed off. It was controversial this summer to let them in. But the reality is, from a basketball standpoint, this helped everybody's at-large chances even more because now you get a quad 1 road game on your schedule for any of these contenders and a really quality quad 2 home game. Because I think they're pretty safely in the top 70 to 80 teams, really high floor with the Lopes. And then I think from there, UNLV is really, really fascinating. They absolutely love their team and meeting with them. Now, we just don't know because Josh Pastner, he had actually, if you look at his Georgia Tech years, they actually were pretty good. Like he had one really, really sensational year where they got an at-large bid and had, top of the ACC type of team. And I think just based on the players they bring in, there's a ton of upside with Kamani Hamilton was like for what I call the under the radar. It's like all these leagues below the Mountain West essentially. But Kamani Hamilton was like first team All-American on that team for us last year in some of our publications. And now he's going to be dynamite as an athlete. He started his career at Mississippi State. And then they have Miles Che, who's just a deadly 3-point shooter from Irvine last year. Might be my favorite Irvine player from last year. And he's part of this UNLV, plus a lot of other good pieces. So they're dangerous. And then also in that second group, I would put Colorado State. It's just, for me, Colorado State's a lot of unknowns. Ali Farouk Manesh, we all know the great story of his, big ball shot against Kansas at Northern Iowa. Nobody will ever forget that if you've watched the tournament as long as Eamonn and I.
Watching it live was one of the great tournament moments of all time. I've seen a few of them. Speaking of which, Bryce Drew was like, I saw that in my grade school classroom as a kid, and that was like, looking back, a big activation moment for college basketball obsession for the rest of my life.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I watched, so I was on the bus home from school when it happened, and I don't remember how we got updates or anything, but I remember running to the TV when I got home and they were showing the replay over and over of the Bryce Drew. So we're probably similar in age. Yeah. So now we have a rivalry for 1 year between two March Madness heroes when Farouk Manesh plays Bryce Drew. So that can be kind of fun.
That is fun. And that also tells you we're getting old. Because these guys are head coaches now. It's a problem. Extremely,
extremely sad. But Colorado State's got some interesting transfers, certainly some upside, and I would put that. And I would say that's the top 7. I think the one team that I may have omitted certainly was intentional, is Nevada just kind of fell apart at the seams last year, and I just, in my opinion, didn't do enough to replenish their roster in the portal. So I do have Nevada a distant 8th, and I wouldn't be surprised if an up and coming team like a Wyoming finished in the top 8 above them. But we'll see. I could be dead wrong. Nevada cares about basketball tremendously. And I know the new Mountain West is counting on that school to be a flagship school, going into the future. But going back to the top. So I do have a surprise champion for you.
Oh, let's hear it.
And I am picking Utah State to win the league. And I think the biggest reason is, and I've read a lot of the previews, and I've listened to a couple of the Mountain West previews that are out there so far, and I just can't believe how nobody's talking about Magoon Gwath is still not practicing. So that's probably the most important thing in the league for San Diego State. The 7-footer, I mean, obviously the big news in portal season was like, holy crap, because I think even Trilly, who's very rarely wrong, as you know, had put a prediction out that he's going to Kentucky. And if Trilly didn't do that, I'm sorry for throwing you under the bus, buddy. But he did not end up at Kentucky. He did not end up at a bunch of these other big schools.
He didn't end up anywhere. Yeah, which is remarkable.
Stayed at the Aztecs. So I think some of the hidden truth behind that is the uncertainty of when he could recover from his knee. And, I keep reading the articles locally. He's hopeful to return to practice at the end of this month. But even if he does, how many weeks of practice does he need before he's game ready? I'm looking at San Diego State's schedule. Obviously, their 3 biggest games are in the Players era, which is Thanksgiving, I'm starting to think there's less than 50-50 chance he plays in those games. If you go back and reconcile last season, of course, San Diego State, one of the last teams in, didn't perform well, of course, at the first four against North Carolina. They would not have gotten in if they didn't beat Houston or Creighton in that event. And so this is like their big event to try to build that large resume. It would be unfortunate. Like, I really love Magoon I love the Aztec program. I used to live in San Diego. So certainly none of this is meant to be a doomsday guy. But if Guath is not in the fold, I think it dramatically changes their outlook. They'll have to depend on Compton and Heidi, who are capable front court guys. And they have a redshirt and 7-footer, Majak, who I think still pretty raw, pretty good rim protector, probably doesn't bring a lot to the table offensively. And the big thing last year for San Diego State was, out of Brian Dutcher's 13 seasons, they've never had as poor of rebound numbers as they did last year, which is part of why they struggled in league play and barely held on to the at-large bid. They finished 205th in offensive rebound rate, and I know it's a huge point of emphasis, but the majority of the front court they brought back are the same guys. So I feel like they might still struggle in that area, no matter how much attention they put on it. And every great San Diego State team is always rebounding in defense, and I think the defense will be fine. But without if Guath is out for any extended period, advantage Utah State for sure. And I do think Utah State they're not as deep as San Diego State by any means, but they have defined roles. Like Drake Allen's a terrific floor general. Speaking of guys who love playing basketball in Utah, here's a guy who started at Southern Utah. He was top 10 in assist rate at Southern Utah. Transfers to Utah Valley, which is like a step up, but in the same league, the WAC, and he's second in assist rate. Last year, he transfers up again to Utah State, another Utah school, and he's second in assist rate in limited minutes. This year, he'll have a full minute share. I think he averaged 22 minutes last year. Should be phenomenal in that role. Tucker Anderson, amazing decision maker, highly efficient. Carson Templin, very similar. He's an all-around glue guy. He made 3 big threes in their road win at St. Mary's that I was at last year. But he makes hustle plays all over the place. Typical like Utah State type of hustle guy. Makes the little plays, takes charges, blah, blah, blah. And then they add Gary Clark, one of my favorite Southland players from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. He was an absolute beast in that league. I think that translates to the Mountain West. And he's a perfect fit for like exactly what Utah State's roster needed. He was the number 1 defensive rebounder in that league last year, and he scored in double figures in every game except for one. So 29 out of 30 Islander games. Gary Clark was that guy, a clear first-team all-conference player. If it all clicks right, he could also be first-team all-conference for Utah State. So I really think the polished, ready-to-go version of the Aggies is a safer pick right now if you break down the injury factor.
Yeah, the injury factor. And look, I mean, Magoon Guath is the player you turn on the TV and you see him play and you go, oh my God, what a pro. This guy is a pro. Like, this is an NBA player. But there is a long line of guys with his sort of skill set and his sort of eye-popping physical and technical ability, who may not be the most fundamentally sound in the trenches guys, the likes of which you were referencing earlier, that have always been at San Diego State, and that fundamentally at the end of the day help you win basketball games. And he was reasonably efficient last year, but didn't blocked a ton of shots. He's a fantastic defensive rebounder, but he's not a great rebound or rim protector. Pardon me. Fantastic blocks guy. But did not crazy. Yeah, I mean, he finished 4th in the country in block rate, which 14.1%, which is pretty nuts for a freshman with his build and all that good stuff. He's just that long. Like, he's got like a 7'4", 7'5" wingspan, and he just clears space, right? But he doesn't rebound the ball super well, and he's, when he gets healthy, eventually, in theory, is the kind of, that's the next step for him. And so we'll see. I'm sure part of the problem with his injury is, instead of being in the gym working on that all summer, he's just going to have to come in kind of hot. And so Brian Dutcher, is the kind of guy who could develop that, but they are going to have a couple of sort of tactical holes they may have to fill in ways that are not, you can coach a lot of that stuff, but at the end of the day, you need guys who are strong and have a knack for it and have the eye for it. So I like that pick. That's fun. Okay, let's go to the West Coast Conference, which again is kind of in its last ride in its current composition, sadly. So what, obviously Gonzaga's Gonzaga, they've been a little bit less Gonzaga in the last couple of years than we grew accustomed to. I think there's still, Ken has them 8th, which is higher than I've seen some other preseason predictions. But, they had a great year last year, even though they ended up as an 8 seed. They eventually rounded into form after some disappointing early performances, destroyed most of the West Coast Conference for most of the season and got to a pretty good place. But, they are not the world destroying Gonzaga that we got to know in their peak years in 2021, 2022, when they were 1 win away. 2021, they were 1 win away from winning the national title undefeated, and then they were a 1 seed again the following year. So let's cover the West Coast Conference. Let's talk Gonzaga, and kind of, obviously St. Mary's is up there in the top tier too, and Randy Bennett does great work. And the conference, like we said, has gotten a little bit deeper into the middle of the league than it used to be. It used to be this I think it affected Gonzaga in some ways, because they wouldn't get almost any credit for their work that they did in the conference. Even if they were blowing people out every night, there'd be a lot of dismissive stuff come tournament time with them. I remember like the Kelly Olynyk year when I think that's the year they got upset, right? And it was just like, well, that's why they shouldn't be a 1 seed. And it's just like, no, dude, they were really good. People losing the tournament. They were really good. But the league's increased depth, I think, has helped them and helped St. Mary's a little bit, because St. Mary's used to be in the awkward position of rarely quite as good as Gonzaga, usually very good, but also got punished in the same way Gonzaga did, without like hey, but our metrics say we're top 5 in the country. St. Mary's being in that like 15th to 30th type of range, where it really mattered for them. Their whether or not they got in the tournament usually came down to, can you beat Gonzaga, which is a difficult thing to ask most years.
Yeah, and most years Gonzaga totally owned them until recently, and now they've started to trade victories, and I think that's been really huge for St. Mary's confidence. In fact, St. Mary's has won the league in 2 of the last 3 years, I believe. So it's been really impressive. It's been really impressive, and I also think that to your point, that's kind of shown that Gonzaga is a little more human. Last year, adding Oregon State and Washington State, even though it's a 2-year contract, I think that just really helped the overall depth. We saw Oregon State beat Gonzaga down in Corvallis. Yeah. And, Washington State was really good through January till some injuries really killed them and they tapered off. But it's really good for the middle of the pack, because the WCC is fascinating, where a lot of these teams, you drop off a cliff to go play Portland or San Diego or Pacific usually. Even Pepperdine's been really down the last decade. So, it's just better for them, because Gonzaga had seasons in the past where they would play those types of games for like 4 straight weeks, and they just wouldn't even challenge. They didn't even break a sweat.
They'd win by like 50 every game, and you're just like, okay, Gonzaga won 105 to 55 again or whatever. It's just like, next one.
Exactly. So now at least they get, out of 2 games a week, they should get at least 1 good one. And as you said, they're a little less dominant as before. I think this year Gonzaga will play, of course, through Braden Huff and Graham Ike, dominant front court, one of the best front courts in the country. Those 2 alone command attention and are great at either creating their own shot or just playing well in space, or playing the 2-man game. Like Braden Smith will be a really interesting case study, because they've had nothing but Nemhards these last 5 or 6 years, right? It seems like maybe only 4 years, but Nemhards are both extremely athletic, extremely cerebral, smart, passers, scorers. They do everything. So Braden Smith, coming from Colgate and redshirting last year, we know he can shoot it. We know he can pass, but it's also a little bit of a drop-off athletically. So that's kind of where the mystery lies, is can they continue to play fast? I think they can. Colgate, of course, the years that Braden Smith were there, they played extremely fast themselves. It should be a fit, but he is a little bit short and a little bit less athletic, probably not an NBA prospect. So it's a little different. And then Adam Miller, like he really shot the lights out at Arizona State, 43% from deep. He's had a long career. He's been through a couple of injuries, been on, I don't even know how many teams.
One of the great, yes, he's still in college basketball guys of the current era.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're like, oh, Adam Miller, that guy used to play at Illinois, right? Like, that's him, right?
Yep,
I
Illinois.
didn't just mess that up. Yeah,
heck of a freshman year. LSU for a couple hot seconds and an injury there. So and now of course Arizona State. So he's been everywhere. But the thing I think the rest of the country needs to hear about both Gonzaga and St. Mary's is when you play for Mark Few or for Randy Bennett, it's a lot different than other programs, especially now, because they bring in guys to fit what they do. They're a little rigid. If you didn't know, I'm sure most people know that part, but you have to like fit their system. And I think with the tools Adam Miller has and the role that Mark Few will have for him, and thank God he's a little older because I think he'll be able to handle that with maturity. And, that will just breed a lot of success there. They're still waiting to find out if Tyon Grant Foster is eligible. And Grant Foster's just had obviously he's tremendously talented and WAC Player of the Year for Grand Canyon, should be an asset. But he's had some differences with teammates in the past. I won't name names, but you just wonder like how bad does Mark Few want him eligible? That will be interesting to see if he pans out or not. But one guy like just in the front court that got flashes, especially in the Santa Clara game, was Ismailia Dayan. I think I pronounced that correctly. 7-footer. He should play a lot more this year. I mean, he won that Santa Clara game for them. So not much will show up in his stats unless you look at that one box score. But this guy is a freak, 7 foot, just super raw. But you could tell at the end of last year it was really starting to click for him. And that should be really great insurance for the front court. So
Few and Gonzaga have always been really good at developing these kinds of guys. They've been good at developing everybody for forever. But this is a great guy to have back because he played so little last year.
Yep.
You could see a possibility where he left to go be guaranteed more minutes or whatever, and getting him back and maybe getting to work on him and work with him a little bit. Yeah, there's a lot of talent there.
Yeah, so it was I was at the game and it was like close to tied or 1 or 2 point game entering the second half, and they had foul trouble in the front court. Anyway, Diane comes in. Nobody really knows about this guy, and he just takes over the game for an entire segment. I think he scored all 9 of his points in that initial segment. Then, of course, they let him play a lot down the stretch due to the foul problems. But his confidence level, like I went to their next game at San Francisco because it was also local. You could just see him in warm-ups. He's like a different guy. And I think that kind of stuff will carry into this year and understanding the program and the system, like you said. And that's a natural transition to how St. Mary's, of course, runs their program. And when the first thing I notice about St. Mary's is 3 redshirt freshmen. And this is just classic Randy Bennett.
He's still doing it.
I've heard
lots of programs would love to keep doing this. He's figured it out.
He's figured it out because he's got the balance of resources and just obviously sustained success. So they've figured out that program from top to bottom. They've got this really amazing way of scheduling. I would like to say I've had a small hand in that, but they've really ran with it these last several years, and that's why they keep landing in the top 20, 10. One year they landed 8 in the net. And basically what they do is they go out and find 8 home games against teams picked in the top 3 of their league. They did it again this year. I know they'll play Arkansas State. They'll play Ohio U. They'll play Chattanooga. And they just go out and in those 8 games, they can actually afford to lose one. And they'll beat a bunch of them by 20. And they can also play a lot of these younger guys and get things going and figure out where they need to be for WCC. They're incredibly, incredibly prepared. You'd be hard pressed to find a more prepared team than St. Mary's anywhere in the country. And they're really skilled at stringing what I call stringing together stops. So last year in the Vanderbilt first round game, I was watching just casually with friends. I tend not to work the first round because I just love it too much. So I'm always somewhere social. And I counted on TV. Yeah, it's a tradition you can't break. But I counted 14 stops in a row in that Vanderbilt game. And during that stretch, they went from down 4 to, I think, up 12. And so they were down 12 and they went up 4 after it was either 14 straight stops or 13 out of 14. But for people from the SEC or people less familiar with St. Mary's, this happens all the time. They had a game against Santa Clara last year, a big game. They go on a 30-0 run, and I think they had 17 straight stops. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And it just happens over and over and over again. And so I think the big stars everybody should know is Mikey Lewis will be tremendous this year. Had a great freshman year. He's on a takeoff launching pad for his sophomore year. And then Paulius Moraskis, if you don't know who he is yet, he's kind of a double-double machine. They won't have Mitchell Saxon, so lean on him a little bit more. But Harry Wessels should pencil right into the Saxon role, and he's much bigger at 7'1". Just got to keep Wessels out of foul trouble. They should be okay there. They also have a 7'1" sophomore, because of course they do, in Andrew McKeever. So they got a ton of depth. They're going to play the same system. They're going to finish. I have no doubt they'll finish in the top 30 in Ken Palm. And I know that's another one I disagree with. I don't know how he has them 55, but they count on me for that top 30 finish. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you can see some holes in the roster. I mean, I think if you're just doing it, like, I can see the case for a step back year, but it's been a long time, I feel like, and let me pull up the history since I have their KenPom page open anyway. It's been since 2021 that they finished outside the top 25 in KenPom, and before that, it had been until 2015 that they finished outside the top 40. So, maybe this is one of those years where they're just refreshing and it's not quite as dialed in, but I can also see the other side of it where there's enough talent here, enough guys to build around, and given Randy Bennett's whole MO, you get there collectively over time, and their early schedule, like you said, is not debilitating. They are not, probably not, maybe we'll see how it goes, obviously, but they're probably not going to take a ton of losses, also while playing quality opposition that they should beat, and so their non-conference schedule will look good. Their metrics will probably look better, maybe even than the performances are in some cases, just because they've scheduled smartly. So we'll see how it goes with them. Okay. And then let's check in on a couple more West Coast Conference teams here. As we said, the depth in the league is getting better and better. And you've got Santa Clara. Sendek just re-signed a deal, which I think makes a lot of sense. Like he's found a home there. San Francisco has managed to be one of those programs, despite losing really talented coaches, consistently good. So give me your thoughts on sort of the rest of the league here.
Yeah, I think those are certainly the next two to watch. Santa Clara, Elijah Mahi is back, and he's shown flashes on certain nights to be an all-conference player. I think for Santa Clara to achieve all their goals this year, which would also include somehow get into that at-large mix, it's another team that's extremely aggressive on scheduling. So if it hits right, they'll get some chances to win some huge games. But until that, they've won some of those big games in recent years, but that last year they slip up against North Dakota State and it's all out the window. They have to just take care of those types of games. But Elijah Mahi, they've got that talented, wing guy that they've seemed to have over and over again with Adama Ball last year. He's now gone. Before that, of course, Podzinski, who's having a hell of a NBA career so far with Golden State. And, of course, Jalen Williams. I mean, they just keep finding these wing players that are just unbelievable. And now I think the big news of the offseason is this whole G League story of Thierry Darlin getting his waiver approved, who just played for the Delaware team in the G League and had a 28-point game in March. And I guess the precedent is simple, just that, if a guy can play European Pro League that never entered the NBA draft, then why can't a guy who entered the G League without being part of the NBA draft be able to play college basketball as well? And so this is crazy. But Darlin's now eligible. And then they've got just three guys that they brought from big-time programs that didn't get to play a lot that are also intriguing quickly. That's Garrick Norman, who came from Michigan State, got a lot of upside potential. Chris Tajo, who came from Iowa, from their bench. And then, don't want to butcher his name, but Gavi Lagave from Villanova, redshirted at Villanova. So Santa Clara is spending quite a bit of money to make all this possible. And the last thing left to do is get to the tournament. And there is just so much upside all over the place. You just wonder if this can be the year. And you almost kind of hope it is, because without Gonzaga in the league after this year, they just won't have that many opportunities to build a resume. So that's kind of their story.
I think it's great too, just really quickly, like Sendek sort of, had a rough go at the end of his NC State tenure. And
he did.
Like, you look back on NC State as a program under him and where they went in the years that followed. I think, it's nice to see him having, you sort of feel like he's found like an outpost and kind of gradually, slowly, steadily built it into something that's like a real competitive program. And you're right, they, the next step is to get into the tournament, get into at-large conversations, whatever. But it's been fun the last couple of years doing bubble watch, whatever, to be like, oh yeah, looks like Santa Clara is pretty good again. Like, they're playing pretty well.
They're so fun to watch. That's been the hard part, is I want the rest of the masses of the nation to see this team on that stage, but it's just so hard for them to get in and break through. And that leads us to San Francisco, who did, of course, break through a few years ago with Todd Golden, my old neighbor and now national champion.
Good coach, that guy.
And yeah, he's not too bad. He finally won a tournament game last year and decided to win all 6 of them. But that's awesome for him, and proud of those guys. But at San Francisco, like, since he's left, Chris Gerlison's actually done an underrated, really good job keeping the floor extremely high. They've been like 1 or 2 results away from cracking the at-large conversation themselves. Pretty deep into last season, they were still part of it. And if you went off the WAB, the WAB, I don't want to mispronounce it, last year, and you added 8 more spots, like we talked about it, San Francisco was in. So they're right there. And this year's pretty exciting, I would say, because Tyrone Riley was a guy that was either going to go to the NBA draft or get a Power 5, 7-figure deal to go to, a top 5 league. And he ends up going through the whole draft process. I think at the very last second, pulls out. Not only that, but somehow the Dons got their money together and kept him. So that's just a huge, huge deal for them because and he's not like a typical NBA prospect. He's just an unbelievable athlete. He does, he can score, and his numbers will go up a little bit this year as a sophomore. But he just does so many little things well, like he offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds, doesn't turn the ball over, he gets steals. He's just everywhere. And he's just going to get better at all those things with one more season in college. Ryan Beasley's a confident point guard, really good kid. So they have a really steady point guard. So I really love those two together. And then guys like Abosi's back, who I think will play a bigger role than some of the projections think. I went to practice last week, got to meet Guillermo Diaz-Graham from Pitt. The other Diaz-Graham, I think is going to Oregon State. So you have both Diaz-Graham.
God, I forgot that's where he went. That's wild. Yeah.
But he's pretty poised.
He's a talented player.
It is. And man, he's like super mature, really poised, doesn't make mistakes. I just really love the makeup of this team. Legend Smiley's like the freshman to watch. There's no doubt he's going to play. It's just how much will he play? But he was one of the best players at practice the day I was there. And then Mookie Cook, who didn't get to see the floor a lot at Oregon, he just has a ton of untapped potential, a former McDonald's All-American. So San Francisco, much like Santa Clara, they're extremely invested in getting back to the NCAA tournament. They went undefeated at home last year as well. So these are excellent basketball programs at this point. And again, this is maybe where the 76-team field could really help, but the league's going to be so much different without Gonzaga. So we'll just have to settle that discussion for another day. And then quickly, the rest of the league, I think there's a group in the middle led probably by Loyola Marymount. I do like what they did in the portal. I just think Stan Johnson's been up and down and probably on the hot seat coming into the year. But to be able to get Tanner Thomas and Shelton, big time scorer from Eastern Illinois, Jalen Shelley was at USC and Rodney Brown was at Virginia Tech. Like, LMU's really invested as well. So they probably have the most upside based on that. But it's more of a prove it thing with Stan. Washington State, similar level. Oregon State, similar level. Seattle University is new to the league, and they are better than I think most people think. And Maldonado, Christophilus, and Arrington are all 3 back as starters. So there's a world where Seattle University, as funny as that sounds, could finish 5th. It's funny because I'm from Seattle.
KenPom, I was going to say, I was just looking at his preseason. He's got them finishing 116th overall.
Yeah.
And 5th in the league, just in terms of like adjusted efficiency rank. Obviously, that's part of what the league rankings will be made up by. Blah blah blah. But I was just sitting there looking before you brought them up. Like, he's got Seattle 5th. Like, what is going on there? So that's interesting.
Yeah, they have a chance.
That program's been in Division I for like what, 8 years or something.
Right, exactly. Well, since 08, and
okay, so it's
Cameron Dollar brought them back. Yeah, and they won the 1965 national title, so the history's really cool with Elgin Baylor, but of course went down, for several decades in between. I think the one other exciting guy is
the next Elgin Baylor the whole time. All they needed was the next Elgin.
We're still looking for him. But Yunsik Yo, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. I've been reading about this guy for like 3 years at Gonzaga practices. So of course Gonzaga, they've got like 5-6 different websites. The Twitter following is insane. For the West Coast, they're kind of like everywhere. So you hear about this kid being awesome in scrimmages, but you didn't see the floor a lot there. He's actually a projected starter for Seattle. So I'm kind of excited. He's 21 or 22 years old now, and he finally gets his crack to play not only as a starter at D1, but in the same league and go up against Gonzaga. So I think that'll be pretty interesting.
Cool. All right, let's move to the A10. Oh, sorry, you're going. You're going. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, bottom. I'm just on these teams. I just have different reasons I'm out on. A lot of hype for San Diego. I just am not a believer in Steve Lavin for several reasons.
Sir. How dare you, sir?
I love the guy. I love the guy.
You're not sharing the sugar right now, Rocco.
I know. Steve and I have a great relationship, so hopefully this goes over well. But I think as a coach, it's just been a rough go down there. They've improved their practice facility. It's beautiful. They're invested in the portal, but I just haven't seen the same investment in, getting these guys to play together. And until I do, I have to keep them at the bottom. And I hope Steve goes back in the booth if it doesn't work out, because he's unbelievable in the booth. And then Pacific, he is. Pacific's a great story because Dave Smart's a Canadian Hall of Fame coach. I just don't think they're spending at the level of these other teams to catch up. But he's probably gonna get the most out of them. And then Pepperdine and Portland. Pepperdine, amazing run to the semifinals. I still can't believe that last year. Unfortunately, they kind of lost all those guys, so they're back on the bottom. One of those scenarios like Indiana State. And then Portland just has not been able to demonstrate any defense. I think 3 years in a row they've finished with the worst defense in the WCC. So I have to keep those 4 on the bottom until further notice.
Okay. All right. Makes sense. Very detailed breakdown of the WCC. We even got a Lav mention in there, which is good. All right. Let's do the A10 real quick, and then we'll bounce around.
Yes.
We'll do a little bit of American, but although I think the American is kind of weird in that, like, I don't know. We'll get to it when we get to
tough.
it. But really tough. So A10 is really interesting this year. I think the Basket and Review preview by the 3-Man Weave guys has St. Louis first, which I kind of love because after being obsessed with Robbie Avila, and I feel like everybody being obsessed with Robbie Avila in the Indiana State year, he went to SLU last year, first year with Josh Schurz at SLU, and it was sort of very under the radar in a lot of ways. I don't feel like I heard a lot of discussion about him. I saw a couple games here and there. It was okay. They didn't play super well for most of the year. They were never really anywhere close to the tournament discussion. And obviously it's the first year at a new program, and they lost all those guys from the Indiana State team. And so there's an adjustment to be had there. But I am potentially excited for the return from exile in the college basketball consciousness if St. Louis is really one of the best or one of the best teams in the A10, to get that hype machine back ramped up again, because Avila is an extremely fun player, and it's fun when everybody is like on board.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the fact that they got him back is crazy, because
it is crazy.
He's the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. All the hype, even going into last year. I mean, he's one of the most popular college basketball players in the country, and for them to be able to retain him, and not only that, but they bring in like the transfer from Quinnipiac, Paul Atieno, he's an absolute beast. I feel like he was worthy of high major interest, just with his rebounding prowess and ability to finish at the 10. And then they bring in Trey Green from Xavier, who, didn't get to play a ton there, but he obviously showcased Big East capabilities. They bring in Ish Sharma from Virginia, who I think was ready to bust out, got kind of buried as a freshman, but I have some friends at St. Louis, so I've seen some practice tape, and Ish looks incredible in the tapes I've seen. So I have to shout him out. And then Brady Dunlap, of course, I think he's fully recovered now from his St. John's injury. And he's kind of a unicorn at 6'7", but can shoot near 40% from three. So you plug a guy like that, you can't block his shot into this system, especially once he's up to full speed. And it's just like weapons all over the floor, which is like Josh Schertz's dream. That's how Indiana State clicked. And I mean, scrimmages or whatever, but when you see them beat Iowa by 25 the other day, you have to raise your eyebrow a little bit that this is what's possible. And so, yeah, I think St. Louis has probably the highest ceiling, as crazy as that might sound traditionally. But they've built it, and they work on, in their practices, they work on all these different speed drills. It's almost like a football level training camp on what kind of shape they need to be in to play in this. But we're kind of at that point right now on October 13th as we record this, to where they're finally like the conditioning's paying off. And they're just gonna run circles around teams that are not in shape. And it's gonna be extremely exciting to watch.
Yeah, no, I'm like I said, I'm really excited for the sort of return to prominence of Avila. And I think, the more you look at the pieces around them, around him and getting a little bit closer back, like they may not be as fluid and as multidimensional as that Indiana State team was, which I would encourage folks to go back if you don't remember, or you just sort of knew of them by reputation because they were in the tournament conversation and you knew about Avila. Almost every other starter from that team, after that season was over, went somewhere like big and played for like a high major program, played well. The collection of talent there that Schurz brought together and elevated was really remarkable. And it wasn't, Avila was the hub of it, but there was a lot of other spokes on that wheel. So getting something even marginally close back to that on the offensive end especially is exciting, because I think part of the reason people fell in love with that Indiana State team, or at least I did, beyond Avila and because of Avila, they were so fun to watch. They play great stuff, and it's super fun to see. And, they just weren't at the profile last year where, again, trying to cover the sport nationally, trying to watch 6 games a night for Bubble Watch or whatever the case may be. You're just not going to sit down for a SLU game when they're ranked like 95th in KenPom or wherever they're at. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not, it's not on the docket at that point. So,
right.
Okay. What else do you make? I think the next conversation for me in the A10 anyway is probably GW. Because in terms of, we led the entire show off at the beginning with mid-majors have this terrible time retaining. It's so hard for obvious reasons, financial and otherwise. And you look at GW, and they returned and retained basically their entire core to a level where they're going in with tournament hopes this year at a program that has not had that level of success. And I think Chris Caputo is a good coach, but it's been challenging there, even though I think that program has the potential, just living in the DC area, being around GW, knowing the kind of people who are alumni of GW and who send their kids to GW, there's money in the system, right? And it's just activating it to get people interested in college basketball. And that's a challenge, but if you can just get a fraction of what's out there in the GW alumni sphere, you've got a chance to have some resources to really compete, particularly in the A10.
Yeah, I mean, I'm affectionate about it a little bit because when I was a kid, George Washington went to the Sweet 16 in the Kingdom in Seattle, and I was there with Yinka Dare, and that was one of my favorite, Cinderella stories. They almost knocked off the fat.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
that is unbelievable.
Amazing. He's one of my childhood heroes, no doubt. And they almost beat the Fab Five. A lot of people forget that in the Sweet 16 as a 12 seed. So there you go. Like, we need more Yankadares in our life these days. But yeah, so I just have these really silly, I don't think there's a better subject in sports than 1990s college basketball. And, stories like that are a big reason why. And I think if George Washington can, they've just got to get over this hump where, Caputo, the A10 does an unbalanced schedule to where, if you're in the top half, you're playing everybody twice. And so when Caputo came into the league, they got one of the bottom end schedules. They played the LaSalles, the Fordhams, the bottom teams in the league twice. And he was able to get a 10-8 record, but just 16-16 overall. And of course, the metrics told us they were still around 200 in Ken Palm, not exactly in the at-large conversation. And then even last year with a much more talented team, a lot of the same guys he'll have this year, he was only able to get to 9-9. So I think that's the biggest question is how is George Washington with this new cast of characters on top of the characters we're familiar with, led of course by Rafael Castro, how are they going to win games on the margins? How are they going to get defensive stops in the clutch? Who's going to be their go-to guy? Can it be Trey Dinkins? Does it need to be Gene Arangaron, who from Hofstra, who was one of our, really like a first-team All-CAA guy? Boo Boo Benjamin, unbelievable defender from Tarleton. Tarleton plays incredibly hard defense. That kind of energy and presence has to help the locker room and the overall team. Tyrone Marshall also played a ton of basketball for Western Kentucky and averaged over a steal a game. So I don't even know who's going to be able to start because they literally have 8 or 9 guys on paper worthy of starting. So they got to figure that out. And then Caputo and his staff just needs to figure out how to beat some of these top 7 or so A10 teams, which we're about to touch on the rest of them, on the margins, because they're not going to be able to just show up and blow them out. So again, with all the talent there, I think we did a great job because we started with St. Louis and George Washington, who I do believe has the highest ceiling. Like if everything hits perfectly, and I mean, they could end up top 40 teams in college basketball.
Well, right. And you look at a program that's been the standard bearer and they've gone through this before multiple times, but VCU is in transition. That's just, yes. They typically handle transition really well. And speaking of resources, that's a program that in terms of resources really does not play or act like a mid-major at this stage. I think in terms
right.
of resources and building and facilities, they're kind of in like that top 40, top 50 college basketball program. So they're always going to be there. And I'd still put them pretty high in this year's A10. What do you make of VCU with Phil Martelli Jr. Taking charge?
Yeah, no, I like the move overall. And like you said, VCU is an extremely invested program. Probably just one cut below Dayton, who basically, in budget, scheduling's all about budgets. So Dayton's the only team at this level that schedules like a Big East team because they operate at a Big East budget. VCU is just right on that next cutoff of, them and probably St. Mary's are equals across the mid-major landscape. So great resources. He was able to bring Barry Evans and Keyshawn Mitchell with him from Bryant, took care of his guys. Jadrian Tracy comes over from Oregon. That kid's got a ton of talent. And Ahmed Noel, who was kind of stuck on the bench at UConn. So they're going to have plenty of pieces. I think from what we know of Martelli Jr., he took over an impossible situation at Bryant with Jared Grasso's crazy flame out. And really was like the most impressive thing about Martelli Jr. is that he somehow kept all those kids locked in and focused, and they became a better basketball team under Martelli Jr. And I thought Grasso was successful.
He was. He was a successful coach. I mean, how it ended was wild, but
very wild.
It's not like he did a bad job,
No, he was doing good. And I mean, he was like, Jared Grasso was a little different style. He was the ultimate cold caller. Like I remember that when recruiting would open, Bryant would offer 300 players in the first hour. So that was a strategy, but it got Bryant on the map, and that was the whole purpose of it. Martelli Jr. was the much more stable, mature. Obviously, we know who his father is. We know who his brothers are. And he's got one of his brothers, Jimmy, I believe, with him on staff at VCU. They're going to be a really steady ship, I think. I just think it's going to be one of those teams that don't beat themselves. Barry Evans is a a great leader. He'll do great at this level. And I just think like if the GWs and the St. Louis's of the world can't meet maximum potential, VCU will be right there ready to knock them off. And so they're, like I said, I think they're a very safe top 75 floor. And then it's kind of up to some of the margins and closing out wins. You know, they might have to win a little ugly with this roster, but I think they're as stable as anybody in this league.
Yeah. And look, I mean, university leadership changes, athletics directors change, but you know, going back to 2007, actually go back to 2003, Jeff Capel's hired, kind of does okay. Hire Anthony Grant, immediate success. Hire Shaka Smart when Anthony Grant leaves. Right. Very like high level success for multiple years, making Shaka the hottest coaching candidate in the country. His replacement is Will Wade. Will Wade's replacement is Mike Rhodes, who does a really nice job, gets them to 3 NCAA tournaments in 6 years. And then you hire Ryan Odom, who I think is one of the smartest coaches in the country. And,
yes.
you just, a few podcasts ago, I can't remember what it was, but I brought up this term called like program mode, where you're not really sure about a team's talent. You're not sure if they're going to be as good as you think, but you just trust the program to figure it out. I think we can apply it to VCU in terms of hiring coaches and remaining competitive even in a transition year.
Agreed. 100%. Yeah. And I think Martelli Jr. is like super motivated to prove them right. Nobody's going to outwork that guy. And so it's going to click pretty soon. I mean, if they miss this year, I still think they'd finish top 5 or 6 in the league. And by next year, he'll have a loaded roster in position to win it. So I think they're in pretty good hands overall.
And we're on our 4th team in the A10. We still haven't mentioned Dayton, which might win the league too.
Yeah, and Dayton, of course, has the best resources overall. Now, what they did with their resources, you could debate a little bit. Now, I am a big Keontae Jones fan. I watched a lot of CSUN basketball last year. Big West was tremendous. I think he can absolutely play at the A10 level. How well he can rebound, I guess, will be the question. He averaged 9 rebounds a game in the Big West. Don't think he could quite do that against these bigger bodies in the A10. But I like Durkak. I think Rutgers was a jump too high for him to go to from Merrimack, newcomer of the year, freshman of the year, to all of a sudden Rutgers level. Obviously wasn't quite fit for that. This is a good, safe zone to play for Dayton. He's an incredible defender, great decision maker, downhill driver, gets to the line at will. At least when he was at Merrimack, he did. I think he should be able to tap back into that. And then, of course, Deshane Montgomery coming from Georgia, great athlete. And I think the big key for Dayton, goes without saying, is Javon Bennett coming back and expanding on what a great year he had last year. 39% from 3, almost 12 points a night, a couple assists, a steal and a half, really good on-ball defender. That will help, set the tone. Like, if he can play like a player of the year level caliber, then obviously Dayton's in great shape to win the league. And they have a good amount of depth as always. So, Bryce Hurd comes over from NC State. They've got a redshirt freshman, Malcolm Thomas from Villanova. So there's a ton of upside on the bench. It's just, what can Anthony Grant get out of them? And they do have to establish a little bit of an identity with all these new parts.
Yeah. Team in transition. Okay. Who else in the A10 sticks out to you?
Yeah, to me, I like Loyola and George Mason defensively. And so
R.I.P.
if it comes
Sister
down,
Jean, by the way. Just want to put that on the record. R.I.P. Rest in power.
Unbelievable. 106 years. What an amazing
college basketball. Became a college basketball icon, honestly.
Yeah, no doubt. Everybody loves
really cool lady.
So maybe Loyola becomes a team of destiny, perhaps, to go win a conference tournament for her. I don't know if Loyola is quite good enough for at-large, but I do think when it comes to the conference race and certainly the conference tournament, they have a great shot because Miles Rubin is one of the best shot blockers, if not the best returning in the country. He can also rebound with the best of the best, has an NBA body, has a good chance to get a 2-way or better contract, I think, once he does turn pro. And there's enough good guard play at Loyola still to where they can make some noise. I would love to see Justin Moore make a full recovery. I was actually sitting with Kevin Sweeney at the game when he tore his ACL in Milwaukee last year. That was really hard to see. So maybe by league play, he's full go. He's got a lot of talent. They did great in the portal, so Loyola's got a real chance. And then with George Mason, it's more they do have to replace a ton there, but they had a top 30 defense, and I do think having a great defense is you can recruit to that, and you can also teach a lot of that. So I do think some of these pieces. I'm trying to remember the kid's name from Presbyterian, Corey Mincy, one of the best steel guys in the Big South. That's an intentional move to keep that defensive pressure where it was. He pencils in as the starting point guard. And then another fella in Jamari Hill out of Ball State, another steal per game guy out of the MAC. So they just want to swarm you with athletes. The question becomes like, can they get enough scoring? I know Troutman at Northeastern was a 13.5 a game guy, and Adebayo from Mount St. Mary's was able to score at the Metro Atlantic level. But I do think George Mason's defense will keep them in a lot of games, and Tony Skins turned out to be an amazing, highly successful coach compared to what his expectations have been. So, I like those two, and I do think lastly St. Bonaventure. There's some upside there. They have a kid, Daryl Simmons from Gardner-Webb. I covered a Gardner-Webb game last year, if you can believe that. And Daryl Simmons was my favorite player on the court. A game between them and Asheville. Asheville has 3 really good up transfers this year too. So I think he'll be a good player in this league. He averaged 17.5 for Gardner-Webb. But he also plays great defense. He's long. He's super athletic, bouncy. Amari Marshall from Albany can also really play. They just got to get those guys playing together. I think with Woj's influence at Bonaventure and Mark Schmidt's obviously a X's and O's genius, you can never count out the Bonnies. And I do think there's enough there to where they can make a move this year. So it's a fascinating top 7 or 8 teams.
Yeah, no, and A10's a fun league just in general. If you're looking for, we said this about the Mountain West, like I have a very fond feeling towards the Mountain West from years and years of doing Bubble Watch, and it's the late game. It's like a 10:30 start or 11 o'clock start or whatever, and it's usually pretty entertaining. A game
always.
between the 4th and 5th best teams in the league or whatever, and they're getting up and down and running. A10's got a little bit of that as well, and you saw it I think last year with George Mason. Metrics wise, they rated where they rated, but they played great down the stretch, and they were so fun in the A10 tournament. So here's to another great Atlantic 10 basketball season. All right, so we've got the American as sort of the last of these big leagues we're going to cover. We're going to cover them quickly because American, again, weird league in a lot of ways. I think its genesis was weird, right? The way it was formed,
right? And
obviously it had UConn in the mix for a while there, and now is kind of like Memphis, and SMU is left, and so it's kind of like Memphis and a bunch of other teams that are trying to beat Memphis on a nightly basis. You can tell me if this is an outmoded way of thinking or what you make of the American coming in.
No, absolutely. I think it's a football conference first for most programs, but
Yeah.
Memphis basketball obviously it's a high major program without a high major league. And you can tell just even this year's roster, they're coming off of a really good year where they got a 5 seed and of course won the double championship. I think Will Warren said it, I think on one of the podcasts last month, where when Memphis plays teams they're supposed to crush, they make it really, really interesting. And then
They all year last year, they won by 5, 6, 7 points. And you're just like, dude, you're winning all these games, but you're not looking great on the metrics front here.
Yeah, it's just they get bored in this league. I mean, I just feel like it's hard for them when you hit that dog days of the conference season, and they're barely surviving against Rice and Charlotte, and it's really it's been a staple of all of Penny's 5 or 6 years there, no matter how good they are. And it's going to be similar this year. Aaron Bradshaw from Ohio State and Kentucky is their center. I saw him interviewed at Media Day today. He even said chemistry is the key, but he's had his ups and downs at those last 2 stops. Sincere Parker was probably McNeese's best athlete and certainly St. Louis's best player a couple of years ago, that last year of Travis Ford. I got to see him. But he's had his off the court stuff. So you don't know what's going to happen there. Doug McDaniel got paid a lot to come over from Kansas State. He's electric, but sometimes doesn't he kind of plays Duke McDaniel's way ever since he's left Michigan. So it's just really interesting because it could go haywire like at any moment, like it usually does. But they're also so talented, and I'm just scratching the surface with those three. I think those are kind of the focal point to start. That you just, they're so talented they could go out and they'll play like 4 or 5 SEC teams and they'll probably beat 2 or 3 of them like they usually do. So I just think it's all kind of human psychology stuff where they're super, super motivated to get that big win. But then when UTSA comes to town, they're sleepwalking. And that'll be a challenge.
I'm just looking at the roster right now. I can't believe how many transfers they have. This entire roster is transfers. Like they have nobody back. That's crazy. Nobody. I mean, Penny has, prior form for putting teams together. Like I think he's kind of a low-key underrated coach in a few ways. I think because he started off so bombastic and recruited freshmen super well those first couple of years. But I think you look at his rosters in the last like 3, 4, 5 years, they've had talented guys, but I think he's gotten more out of them than he's generally gotten credit for. So, could happen again here. They're probably the most talented team in the league, but there's just a lot of new guys here that they have to put together pretty quickly. But I do like Bradshaw. Bradshaw's quietly could have a really good year for a Penny Hardaway team.
Sure, yeah. If it all clicks, he's going to be unstoppable. 7'1" guy in this league. There's not many 7-footers at all across the league. And then the interesting one for me, I guess, is his son coming back, who played 1 year for Randy Bennett here at St. Mary's, which is very rare. But I feel like he was kind of sent out on a secret mission, like figure out how St. Mary's plays and let's.
What does Randy Bennett do? Come tell me.
Yeah, let's practice like that. So I'm not that Ashton's a really good kid. He'll play a little bit, but like I want to know if they stole anything from St. Mary's. That fascinates me for some reason.
Dad,
but I think you have to go to.
I stayed there an entire year and I got the whole practice plan and playbook.
That's right.
Mission is complete.
Mission complete. Now I'm back, baby. Yeah, it's pretty funny. South Florida's the team you got to go to next, though. And that's mainly because Brian Hodgson. I've studied his past. I covered him and Oates at Buffalo, and Hodgson was always the big recruiter guy. And when Alabama started making splashes right after Oates got hired, Hodgson was the primary recruiter. When he gets to Arkansas State, first of all, him taking Arkansas State was a huge surprise to many in the industry because he was tailored to be a high major coach immediately. When SEC jobs opened, his name was on the list. So for him to go take a somewhat obscure Sun Belt job was surprising. He did tremendously well in his 2 years. He learned some stuff in that first year, tried to play extremely fast, then went slow, then went average at the end of that season. Last year they went back to playing pretty fast, top 50 tempo. But he's bringing Joseph Pinion and Isaiah Nelson with him. And Isaiah Nelson's an absolute microwave. He had a game last year where he had 30 and 20 in less than 30 minutes in a league game. And so just ridiculous levels of abilities to score for Mr. Nelson. And C.J. Brown is a guy he decided to retain because he liked a lot of his tape. So he's the only holdover, I think, from South Florida last year. But Damian Collins, who's played at LSU, is there. The kid Hayde from Central Connecticut, I really like his game. I think he was the second best player in that league last year. Just going to be a role player on this roster. And you look up and down, it's like 8 seniors, a junior, sophomore, and a bunch of talented freshmen that may or may not contribute. So South Florida I could easily see them winning the league.
Yeah, I mean, look, South Florida is a program, that's a big school. There's money there. You hire a good coach. It's the prototypical kind of program that hasn't had a ton of, they're not terrible. They've never, it's not a historically terrible program or anything, but it's the kind of place with a big high ceiling if you get the right coach and you put a little bit of money behind it. And I think maybe you'll start to see that already this year because I think Hodgson is probably that good. So yeah, we'll see how it goes for them. Anyone else in the American you really want to highlight before we get to sort of our best / most interesting of the rest around the country?
Yeah, I'll speed it up, but I'll just mention UAB. Andy Kennedy mainly just gets my respect. 4 straight years he's been to the conference title game, and of course, I think won it twice. He's done a great job there because it's almost, the American out of all 31 leagues this year, and I think it was true last year, has the least amount of continuity in the country. 28.3%, I believe, per Bart Torvik's database.
That's a great stat.
Yeah, and they were talking about that a little bit earlier. And I think Kennedy, he's really good with new pieces. I mean, I just think some of his familiarity with the JUCO scene and just coaching at different levels through his past and being an assistant for Huggins, he's really learned how to work with all types of backgrounds and kids. And that's a perfect formula for UAB. So they're penciled in to start 4 starters again. Some of these guys are proven, some of them a little less, but like Ahmad Robinson was a terrific SoCon player at Mercer. He'll be a really good player in this league. That's their spark plug, catalyst, point guard, whatever your nickname of choice is, floor general. Kyron Lindsay, we know from watching a lot of Valley play, can really play at the American level. Comes over from Murray State. And Daniel Rivera, people might remember him from UMass, takes advantage of the JUCO year. So again, it's probably a typical UAB year where they go like 500 in non-con, and they're totally out of the bubble watch scene. But then they inch by inch climb the American standings, probably finish top 3, and might just win the American tournament once again.
Yep. Yeah, Andy Kennedy has done a great job there. I mean, he's sending Yaxel Lindenberg off into the world, who's, on many people's short list for one of the best players in the country this year. So he's done a really good job of talent acquisition and sort of building teams out of seemingly disparate parts. And, has a long history of doing that. Kind of did that at Ole Miss too. That was back in the days of the old SEC when he was there at Ole Miss, and they were competitive every year, even though Ole Miss as an institution really did not care about basketball. And I think the whole SEC has started to care, obviously, a lot more. But that was a different time, and he got them highly competitive 20-win plus seasons almost every year. So he has a knack for this exact kind of build. All right, let's scan across the rest of the mid-majors, because there are some teams. I'm just going to read them out to you. These are the teams, quasi tier, not really a tier list, but just the teams that I sent to you as like, oh, this team sticks out. Oh, this team sticks out. So I'm just going to read them off for the readers, and then you can jump in with anybody that you have or that anyone you want to discuss in further detail. So I've got teams to watch for people who, college basketball fans who care about this stuff and want to have a jump on, teams they might see in February and March, sort of in the bubble mix, or just like you're getting ready for your bracket or whatever the case may be. And you want to know what the pedigree of some of these teams are and whether we thought they were going to be good early in the year. I've got Liberty, Yale, Akron, Illinois State, UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara. Shout out the UC schools, really churning out some good basketball teams lately. Although there's like 30 of them in Division I, so the hit rate is kind of, percentage. You play the percentage game there, but UNI, Miami of Ohio, obviously, Bradley, High Point, Belmont. And then one interesting one I wanted to bring up was just McNeese State after the Will Wade sort of bump and now the transition. Like, I'm interested if like McNeese goes back to being what McNeese was before, or if they can set the floor and sustain this for any period of time. So are there any of those teams you are particularly interested in discussing, or other teams you want to bring up as we go along here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great list. I do what's called a non-power top 60. I actually posted it this morning. And so I know the people that love this level like to track that, because I'll update it weekly once the season gets going. But yeah, a lot of those teams are right up there. So we're on the same page with the teams to watch. I think Liberty's my number one team, who you started off with. That's a great place to start. I think with Zach Cleveland, for this level would be a preseason first team All-American. And I'll do a post on brackets here on this. I'm trying to get it out by next Monday, but certainly before the season starts, look for that, because we'll do an official watch list for this whole level, give those guys some love. But Liberty also has their point guard back, and they also have Matheny back. So both their starting two guards and their big man. That's a lot back for this day and age. That's the biggest problem that we probably didn't touch on enough at the beginning of the show, which is just that it's so hard for these teams to keep guys. And when they're starting over every year, that's giving the big boys, the Power 5 teams, an even bigger advantage. The one thing that gave mid-majors in general so many awesome stories and chances to go far in March was these kids have all played together 3-4 years. They know everything about each other. They can anticipate things that, these recently built power teams can't keep up with. And it's just like poetry in motion, which is our favorite basketball to watch. But those days are mostly over. So it's good when you can see a Liberty and maybe a couple of these other examples keep those guys together for multiple years, especially the core guys. Certainly what you saw with
Richie
UC San
McKay,
Diego.
I was going to say really, really quick, Virginia fans lamenting the way basketball changed and what that did to Tony Bennett's success. And eventually, I think essentially was the impetus for him deciding to retire. The flame is still burning, no pun intended. Truly, no pun intended.
There we go.
With Liberty and Richie McKay, who's a former, UVA assistant and a Tony Bennett guy, and kind of runs that program essentially stylistically and strategically the way Bennett did at Virginia. And if you're doing that, you have to retain, and he has done a pretty good job of that. And that's, I think, why you're seeing Liberty pop up on lists like yours and others.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's just like they were a 12 seed last year. The Conference USA was better than the American if you go by KenPom conference rankings. And nobody really talked about them. But from top to bottom, Conference USA is extremely competitive with a lot of tough as nails teams and tough as nails road trips. Like that league stretches from Lynchburg, Virginia to Las Cruces, New Mexico. And this year they add Delaware and Missouri State. So it's just like these guys are grinded out and they're still finding ways to win. So I thought Liberty deserved it based on all those factors. Another team that, UC Irvine would be my second team. And I know they lose the big guy, 7-footer and Bent Leuchten from Germany, who was such a matchup problem. And Devin Tillis is going to Virginia, just another one of Ryan Odom's great pickups. But I think they do have a really nice core back. In fact, Darren Saran was a great player for them 2 years ago. Got hurt a little bit at Stanford last year, came back to Irvine, just put up 27 in their exhibition game against Arizona State when they beat the Sun Devils this past weekend. Obviously, it's an exhibition game, but good sign for Mr. Saran. But Andre Henry, I think a lot of people forgot about him. Tore his ACL last year. 2 years ago, he's the Defensive Player of the Year in the Big West. That's a big part of Russell Turner's formula, obviously figuring out ways to get stops and create all sorts of chaos for opposing offenses. He's an unbelievable coach. And Julian Dixon can really score. They had some injuries last year where Dixon had to be the man in moments. I have no doubt in my mind he can do that consistently night in and night out. Plus Kyle, we call him Kyle the Denial because he's such a good shot blocker. Kyle the Denial Evans is back. Very excited about that.
What a nickname. And that's like an ABA nickname. I love it.
It's unbelievable. We were I was on the call in Canada for their tournament win, and my play-by-play guy Rod Black up there, true Canadian, came up with that. So shout out to Rod. But the last guy I'll shout out is Harrison Carrington. Played considerably for Colorado in the Big 12. Now he's coming to UC Irvine. I think that's an underrated pickup. So they're going to be just as good. They're going to win a lot. They're going to piss everybody off in the Big West. That's just what Russell Turner does. And then I think, just to summarize this a little bit cleaner, the Missouri Valley Conference, let's just look at that as a whole, because if anybody can emerge out of any of these leagues, it's that league. 5 really quality teams. If somebody gets hot and can go 18-2, 19-1, do what Drake did last year, Indiana State before them, and several others before them, Northern Iowa, Bradley, and Belmont are my 3, 4, 5. And then I've got Illinois State, who I think a lot of people will pick to win the league due to the fact that 2 all-league players are back in Chase Walker and Tyler Kinziger. And then the last team is Murray State, who probably spent the most money in the portal. Everybody's new there. Ryan Miller's there as the new head coach, but they're going to run the Creighton offense. I think Murray State's going to be a joy to watch. Out of those 5 teams, if one of them can emerge and really dominate the league and have a quality non-conference, that's the league to watch. And on top of those 5, I still think Drake and Southern Illinois as a 6 and 7, maybe in that second tier, are very, very quality programs for this level. And they're all in the top, 32 for me. So you said UC Santa Barbara, Aiden Mahaney is there, like a former
back to the
first
level.
team.
I think this is, look, I love that player at St. Mary's, right? I was all on the Mahaney bandwagon. It obviously didn't work out at UConn, but it's just, you're playing, even in so years, you're playing guys who play at Providence who are like 6'4" wings and they're like 210 and they're just massive. And you just don't see that in the West Coast Conference, it's just a different deal. But that's a really talented guy and a really good pickup for UCSB.
Oh, it is. And I mean, Joe Pasternak has got the resources together there. The last couple portal cycles, they've been the most invested from a pure dollars perspective. And I just think, he's got to find the right mix that can work. He had that special season about 3-4 years ago with Ja'Cory McLaughlin running the point where they probably should have beat Creighton. They lost in a 5-12 game by 2 points, but they finished the year like 52 in Ken Palm. So there's no shortage of talent. They've got a kid in Hosanna Katenge. 2 years ago, I did a game down in Louisiana at Lafayette, and he's a quality, one of the best big men in the Sun Belt 2 years ago, coming off injury. So if that all clicks, combined with like Fontenette and Miro Little and Colin Smith, the Gauchos have a ton of upside. So they belong in the top 10. Obviously, another team that spends a lot of money is High Point. Have to watch out for the Panthers, like very, very invested, somewhere around $1.5 million to $2 million roster. Just not the normal Big South program anymore. And to that point, I know you've talked about Radford on earlier shows. They're also invested. Matt Winnick loves their portal ads, so shout out to Matt. We're really curious about them. And then you mentioned Yale early on, like Nick Townsend is a proven commodity, maybe the best player you can count on to be an All-American type of mid-major guy. He probably will be close to a double-double average. And they'll be running basically everything through Townsend with Palakidis now graduated.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't have anyone else. Do you? I mean, let's. What do you think about McNeese? Yeah. What do you think about McNeese? That's my one interesting sort of. They had this crazy Will Wade run where he went in exile, and then the rest of the college basketball world caught up to him. He had a really funny quote with the Field of 68 the other day about. Jeff Goodman asked him, obviously you paid Darian Williams a lot of money, if I'm allowed to say that. And Will responded like, well, unfortunately, I've always said that. But, he went into exile at McNeese, immediately made them good. And now from the, obviously people follow the Will Wade side of it, and he's off to NC State and he's got this great, group of players that he's already recruited, and he's doing a lot of interesting things on the analytics side and the player evaluation side. But I am curious about the McNeese perspective, because do you build on this, or do you kind of recede back into the Homer Simpson gif of him going back into the bushes? Is that McNeese the next 5 years, or do they sort of the way that VCU did once upon a time? Do you kind of build off of what you've built so far?
Yeah, I think it's going to be the latter, at least in the immediate future. So the McNeese backers have really, really put a lot of effort behind this, behind all of athletics at McNeese, really. But men's basketball, of course, having the most success with Will Wade being the coach and bringing in the talent that he did. Well, Bill Armstrong comes in, and, Bill was like the head assistant for Will at LSU. So he knows the region. It's almost like the perfect hire, and they're almost going to I had the opportunity on the Field of 68 show I'm on last week to interview Javon Garcia, who I think a lot of people, because he's not even on Bart Torvik's website right now, And so I think a lot of people were caught off guard in scheduling that he's still on the team. But Javon Garcia, like, this dude is a beast. And Will Wade's quoted several times last year that Garcia is their most valuable player. He won the MVP of the Southland Conference tournament. He literally does everything. He 5 assists a game, 6 rebounds, amazing on-ball defender, great in steals, 13 points a game, just does it all. And so we interviewed him last week for our show on there. And his quotes were kind of mind-boggling to me, and I kind of had to reset my own expectations for McNeese, because I look at the Southland as an up-and-coming growing league. I know Incarnate Word is spending money, and Northwestern State and New Orleans has P. Diddy as their GM. And so the league, Lamar's...
Wait, is he allowed to do that, given... You mean Diddy?
I believe so, yeah. They're playing an exhibition game.
Master P?
Master P, I'm sorry. What did I say?
I was going to say, I think Diddy has other stuff going on right now.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I was going way too fast there, Eamon. So
I want to just clarify for the record. Yeah. Okay.
So this week we have an exhibition game.
That's
with New
a good
Orleans
deep
and
cut for
Sacramento
anyone
State,
who makes
it's
it this
Master
deep into
P
the show.
against Shaq, and it's I guess it's sold out. Is that true? I don't know, but they're playing each other on TV, and I think that's phenomenal. And Corpus Christi's got a great program. So does Lamar. I could go on, but almost everybody's invested suddenly, and this used to be a really bad league. And McNeese, going back to Garcia's quote, their goal is to go run the table, go undefeated, and they think they can do it. They picked up Gary Dual, who's a former high major player. DJ Richards is supremely talented. And the guy I'm really, really excited to see is Larry Johnson. He's a former 4-star recruit. I think he had to sit out a year for one reason or another. But not only Garcia in his interview last week, but everything I'm reading is he could not only be the freshman of the year in the Southland, but maybe the best freshman in all of college basketball. So if you ask anybody around McNeese, they think they're equally as good. And to me, they sound extremely dangerous. And I'm excited to see them play.
Yeah, that's great. It would be nice if Will Wade sort of Johnny Appleseeded a program into sustainable competitiveness and growth and all that good stuff, because that story's been fun the last couple of years, and you just like to see programs like that pop up and continue to get resources, and it's not all just tied to one guy. So let's hope it works out for McNeese. We will continue to cover the mid-majors on this show and certainly on the website throughout the season. Check back. There will be many more teams, I'm sure, that will pop up, that will pop out, that will be disappointing, that will be exciting. It's going to be a really fun season. And like we said at the top, all the way back at the beginning of the show, a really interesting sort of hinge point for, the mid-major, quote unquote, capital M, moving forward in the landscape of college basketball. So no one better to talk about it than Rocco. Thank you, Rocco, for being on the show, man. This was great.
My pleasure, man. This was awesome. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Really quickly, we want to thank our producer, Corey Aldis, who makes this all sound really, really good and professional, despite our best efforts. Want to thank our graphics wizard, Sam Freyer, who does all the art for the website, and it looks really cool. Thank you to Homefield for sponsoring the show. Thank you all for listening. We will be back next week. This is the Basket Under Review podcast. See you later.